Most exciting panel of this afternoon. Why? Because we're talking about the future, and we're talking about Ukraine's battle for the future in this new world order. And here we are this afternoon at the KIEF International Economic Forum. A big thank you for the organizers for bringing us all together. I think it is quite phenomenal, and we see that so many of our colleagues, the business community across the world, are looking how a country continues to operate and how business continues to operate during a full-scale war. So it's so good to see so many companies here that are continuing to do business and are supporting the country, supporting the economy. And I think today really it's about also sharing best practice, because we have so many of our American chambers of commerce from across Europe that are trying to understand how businesses continue to work during a war. Our colleagues in Taiwan, in Taipei, I was in Taipei in March, are also learning. So I think who better to tell us about the future, Ukraine's battle for a future in the future in this new world, this order. So we have joining us from across the Atlantic. Good morning, George Friedman, founder and chairman of Geopolitical Futures. George is one of the world's leading geopolitical strategists and analysts on international affairs. And he has founded Geopolitical Futures as an online publication that forecasts global trends through geopolitical and economic analysis. So George, welcome. We have here arrived from across the Atlantic, Mason Clark, National Security Fellow at the ISW, the Institute of the Study of War. Mason is a leading analyst on Russian military capabilities and strategy. He joined ISW in 2018 and has led the organization's Russia team from 20 to 23, designing and overseeing ISW's coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think the ISW coverage is something we follow very, very closely. So we're delighted to have Mason here in Kyiv. We have Yehor Chernyev, a member of Parliament of Ukraine, deputy chairman of the Committee on National Security, Defense and Intelligence, and chairman of the permanent delegation of Ukraine to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. And Yehor is a Ukrainian legislator focused on defense reform, NATO integration, and cybersecurity. And he plays a key role in aligning Ukraine's defense policy with NATO standards and advancing cooperation with allied parliaments. And we have Ambassador Vadim Pristaiko. Vadim has served as Ukraine ambassador to the United Kingdom from 2023, and previously served as Ukraine's Minister for Foreign Affairs, a career diplomat who's played a key role in advancing Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic aspirations, coordinating NATO and strengthening UK strategic cooperation, including security and defense partnerships. So I think maybe to kick us off, I don't know, George, I hope you can hear us, I hope you can see us. George, I mean, kick us off in terms of this helicopter view, or maybe, as we say nowadays, a drone view on the where you see Ukraine, where you see Ukraine's in this battle for the future. I know we've had discussions with you already. I think some of your remarks will be very interesting to hear here on the ground in Kyiv. But I mean, do kick us off how you, in your experience, see Ukraine and where you see the future of Ukraine in this new world disorder. So George, take it from here.
Thank you. First, I would like to thank Ukrainian citizens for their heroic defense and the superb performance they have put on. It is a defense of the world and the West as well, and therefore me and my family. Thank you very much, and I mourn for your dead. In doing an analysis of this sort, it is absolutely essential to understand your enemy. You cannot understand him if you hate him, if you demonize him. The hardest thing in analysis is to take the position of some nation you fear, some leader you loathe. When we take a look at the Russian position, they are at a terrible geopolitical position. For years, they had a buffer zone to the west that protected them to some extent, but not from Hitler, not from Napoleon. And after the Cold War, they were in a superb position for really the first time. A very secure Western buffer that protected them against NATO. You would say, why did he need protection in NATO? Because for the Russians, they've been betrayed several times, the last time by Hitler, whom he made a treaty with. And he has a rational view. Intentions can change. Power is real. So it was possible to predict the Ukraine war, and I apologize for having done that. Long before, it was necessary for the Russians, an imperative for their national security, to retain their Western buffer. And the first nation they had to deal with, and would deal with, I thought, was Ukraine. Because Ukraine's border is about 300 miles as the crow flies from Moscow. And the historical terror of Russia is that sort of attack. And while we know that NATO would never do that, could never do that, the Russians always play the worst possible scenario. So we have to understand the deep Russian fear that created Putin. During the transition between Brezhnev and Putin, there were a series of reasonable, decent men who did not understand the geopolitical necessities of Russia. Putin came to power based on that. He took his power in the face of the Yugoslav war, and he regarded the West as inherently offensive. In the end, they would use the loss of the buffer to threaten Russia. And so he had to create that buffer zone again. The problem with it was that he did not understand either how weak the Russian army is, nor how strong the Ukrainian defense would be. From the first day of the war, it was clear that he had a World War II sense of warfare. 3 different thrusts not supporting each other, designing to create havoc inside of Ukraine, did not anticipate the ability to defend, failed in the attack on Kiev, and so on. The problem now is that from a political standpoint inside of Russia, Putin cannot end the war on these terms. The price of the reality of the war, the price he paid for this, was enormous, both in his place in the world, in his internal economics, as a relationship with countries with which he had to have had a better one in order to develop it. For him now to capitulate at any end of the war which ends without regaining the West is a very difficult thing to do. From a geopolitical point of view, this war should go on. From a political point of view, the question is, how long does the Russian public tolerate this? The Ukrainians have no choice but to continue the war. And the West has no choice but to support Ukraine, because they also need a buffer between Russia and Europe, and the United States needs that as well. So when we look at the situation that exists at this moment, we have a massive Russian military failure. They've hardly penetrated. We also have a Russia that is now learning the nature of war in this era. It's not World War II. A Russia that has now recruiting people from all over the world as mercenaries because their military is not capable of metabolizing all the youth of Russia. So when I look at the situation, at great cost and great heroism, Ukraine has created a fundamental crisis inside of Russia that is hidden by the idea that Putin himself is like the Tsars, like the chairmen of the Communist Party, invincible. And to a great extent he is. He is manipulated. But we've seen in Moldova a very interesting thing. We've always been talking about hybrid warfare by the Russians. And hybrid warfare means subterfuge, undermining, warfare, psychological warfare, and all these things. And there was, for a few weeks before the Moldovan elections, a terror that the Russians were using this effectively in Moldova. Well, we saw what happened in Moldova. The fear was not valid. The most important thing is not to overestimate the Russians. The Russians have failed consistently in this war, causing massive heartbreak inside of Ukraine. But their ability to end this war, which I think at the beginning would appear to be a matter of months at most, demonstrates a fundamental weakness of the Russians. The weakness is in their military force, which is not evolved, is now evolving into a contemporary force, not following World War II models. But more important than that, it has a political crisis within it, which we do not see, because the world around Putin is mysterious and unknowable. But what is most important is that they are desperately trying to do something that's quite rational, rebuild their buffer. Historically, it should have been an easy task. It became an undoable task. And they're trying all sorts of things to try to remove support for Ukraine without doing the one thing that the West must have, accepting the borders they had before and retreating. So there's a paradox. They cannot give the West what they need for a war. They cannot win this war. They can only prolong it eternally. What happens inside of Russia, I think, is the most important question now. Because certainly the Russians are not fools. The Russian people are not idiots. And at the same time, the people who are around Putin are not fools. Putin is fighting for his political life and perhaps his own life, having made a massive mistake in what he did, based not on the irrationality of the action, but not understanding the weakness of the Russian military and the strength of the Ukrainians, and the willingness of the Europeans and the Americans to get at distance involved. So, to me, the war's question right now is not military, although the fighting goes on and it's tragic. It is a question of what happens inside of Russia, which is a very difficult thing to understand because there is no Politburo, and it's very hard to see what the politics are like. You in Ukraine may have a better sense of it, but the point is that I was amazed at how badly the Russians fought, how poorly they thought out this war, and how they never really restructured. Was a very strange thing. On the other hand, the inability to take Ukraine tells us more about Russian weakness than about Russian power. So we must now build our strategies, as the Ukrainians at great price have taught us, not to overestimate what Russia can do. To take Russia as a serious power with a weaker army than we thought, and also very little imagination. So the most important thing at this point is to put ourselves at Russia's place, see how the failure looks from that point of view, and manipulate that, use that as our weapon inside of Russia. The attack Ukraine made, the superb attack with the intelligence forces, had to have shaken the Russian public by the core. So how this war ends really depends in part on what Putin thinks how long it takes for the Russians to understand their failure, and so on. I think we are at that point now. When you're recruiting people from the Congo to come to serve in the Russian army, you've reached a pretty serious point. So I congratulate the Ukrainians. I'm sorry I'm not there. In a way, I'm happy I'm not there. I'm not a brave man. But you are. So you have demonstrated for history something very important, something that was thought of many times in the United States. What if the Russians aren't as powerful as we think they are? Well, you had to pay the price for learning that, and I thank you for that.
Thank you, Dr. Friedman, for those quite inspiring remarks, I think, highlighting the bravery of the people here and the fact that the analysts in February 2022, when they said Kyiv would fall within 3 days, here we are, the 4th year of this full-scale war, and Kyiv stands and Ukraine stands and business stands united with Ukraine. So, but I want to bring in Mason. Mason, your job is to study war. That's what. I mean, how much longer do you plan to study the war in Ukraine? And how do you think? How much longer you're going to study it, and when and how do you think it will end?
Well, thank you. Well, we don't intend to stop producing our daily updates anytime soon. We've done them since February 19th, 2022, and we've covered every day in between except for, I believe, Christmas and New Year's Eve. And we have no plans to stop producing the updates 7 days a week as long as the war is important, and it is going to continue to be important until Ukraine is able to defeat the Russian military. And even beyond, we're going, of course, to continue to study the Russian threat. In terms of the general prospects of the war, I think we are not necessarily at a stalemate, which is a word that gets thrown around a lot in American discussions. Both sides have fully optimized themselves to fight the current positional war that we are seeing in Ukraine. The Russian military, after a period of, frankly, losing its status as a adaptive organization in 2022 and 2023, has regained a lot of those attributes. They have done, unfortunately, a very good job of reworking a lot of their command structures and tactics in order to fight this slow, grinding advance, which is premised on the idea that, one, Ukraine will not be able to launch counteroffensives to retake occupied territory, and two, European and American support for Ukraine will eventually die away. If one or both of those can be challenged by either Ukrainian forces planning and conducting well-designed limited counteroffensives, or, as we are seeing some elements of, if Europe is able to continue to ramp up its support for Ukraine and invest more in targeted bilateral agreements, then we might be able to see a challenge to Putin's theory of victory. And the Russian military is not going to be able to replace its losses indefinitely, which again is an idea that seems very foreign to a lot of NATO planners and American military planners. So I think what we're going to see is certainly a continuation of the war and active Russian offensive operations into at least mid-2026. Past that point, I think we're going to have to reassess the capability of the Russian military to sustain its current method of warfighting. And I do think that a possible scenario that is not being discussed enough in the US, at least, is not any sort of actual ceasefire, no Minsk III or anything like that, but rather just a gradual slowdown in Russian military offensive operations, but still an active front line, unfortunately for the indefinite future, pending further Ukrainian efforts to be able to launch counteroffensives or any other major changes in the situation on the front line.
Super. So I think if we go now to Yehuda, I mean, Yehuda, you have quite a historic role. I mean, being a member of parliament and more importantly on the Committee of National Security, Defense and Intelligence and the chairman of the permanent delegation of Ukraine to NATO during a full-scale war. And today, I mean, tomorrow is quite a historic day also. President Zelensky is in Washington, meeting with President Trump, asking for support, asking for tomahawks. What is it that Ukraine really needs now from the West, from President Trump, and what are the likelihood of getting that? And what do you think will happen next?
Well, thanks God that President Trump transfer his attention from just diplomacy to the support of Ukraine on the military level. Because you remember that President Trump said that he will stop this war in 24 hours because he knows how to talk with Putin, and it will be enough. Now he finally understands that Putin understands only the language of power. Language of power, it's more weapon for Ukraine. It doesn't matter, should it be supplemental as a donation for Ukraine, or it's Pearl program when European countries will buy this weapon for Ukraine. We need this weapon here. Long-range missiles can be a factor that can deter Russians, but I cannot say that it will become a game changer. For present days, it's not enough. Just have this Tomahawk. It's also a question how many Tomahawks we will have, if we will have them. And, you know, this is a good shift from the perspective of this war in the West, in the US. We have to rely on ourselves, first of all, and we have to rely on our European partners, because we now, without again, the nations as a military support from the US. And I just came from from the session of Parliamentary Assembly, and we had bilaterals with our European partners, and we asked to finance for the next year program Pearl, to finance our internal production, because we produce a big range of different weapons, from interceptors and drones to artillery systems and artillery shells. And we, for now, use 40% of our own weapon on the battlefield. Our goal for the 2026 is 50% of our weapon that should be used on the battlefield, on the front line. So I think this several phone calls and meetings for the last days, it's a good signal of the shifting of the position of President Trump about the war, and it gives us some hope that peace through strength, as a formula of President Trump, really will work in these circumstances.
But are you optimistic that President Zelensky will return here to Kiev with the Tomahawks?
I hope so. Probably not only with the Tomahawks, because the US has a lot of different weapons that we need. And I'm talking not about air defense systems, but also about different types of long-range missiles that they have. It's not only Tomahawks, but another one that we already discussed with them, and I hope that good news will come soon.
Excellent. I'd like to bring in Vadim Prystaiko, who served as Minister of Foreign Affairs with President Zelensky, and most recently was Ukraine's ambassador to London, to the United Kingdom. Vadim, I mean, you probably better than anyone sort of understand NATO and working how Ukraine is been getting its voice across to NATO. I mean, where do we go from here in terms of the future, Ukraine and NATO, with this new world disorder, with President Trump's view on Ukraine and on NATO? What happens next? Where do we go from here?
Thank you. Now we established who is responsible of that war is continuing the ISW. We can talk about something, how we finish it up. And the idea of us becoming a member of something bigger than us, the alliance, which has nuclear capabilities, for example, as our umbrella, it's always been, this dream of Ukrainians. But I want us to be realistic. We are not becoming a member of NATO right now, and we won't be able to forge any new alliance in a foreseeable future. So let's focus on what we can do and how we can get closer to the only alliance available, and in this part of the globe, which is NATO. There are different things like, I don't know, the JEF, which I was playing with. It's called Joint Expeditionary Forces. 10 nations, Nordic mostly, who are led by UK now. Used to be 8 NATO members and 2 plus Nordics, now all of them in NATO. At one of the conversation, the distinction between big NATO and Jeff, the Minister of Wallace, described me as a beer-drinking nations against wine-drinking nations. Probably what he was trying to tell that North South, but it was much more colorful, the explanation. At least I got it. I understand the list of nations. So this can be done, and as a matter of fact, we even applied for the membership. We sent an official formal letter signed by Minister of Defense and received very polite thank you, but no. I guess that we have to send another one. Maybe they read it wrongly. Because what Ukraine is now showing, that this is a big new power emerging in Europe to reckon with. And that's something we can offer to the alliances. I'm not saying that without the nuclear weapons we are a key member of NATO. No. What I'm saying that there is a place for us in this union, and we proved that our soldiers and our people have courage, resilience to become a fighting part of the NATO, not somebody who is piggybacking, is that how they called? So to get back, if alliance survives this Washington administrations, fine. If not, so Europeans will have to leave their backside and finally start doing what they have been promising for quite a while, build the European defense structure. And here Ukraine to help. I believe that this thing, and on top of many other smaller alliances like widely advertised but not really been born, Ukraine, Polish, British thing, or Ukraine, Poland, Romania, or other things. All of them quite instrumental, not decisive, but if we don't have one big alliance, why would we try to web, the sort of alliance out of smaller pieces? Something what Australia is doing, trying to build a bigger one with this AUKUS thing, then cooperation with Singapore, cooperation with Japan, and all of it. So I guess that's the scenario for us in the foreseeable future.
Okay, just to add some color to this, I mean, Dr. Friedman has suggested Ukraine should be like Switzerland, taking a total, I mean, Dr. Friedman will correct me, but if I got this right, I mean, I understand you don't agree with that.
No, I like chocolate and rocklet cheese and all of this stuff and mountains, and everybody has the grenade launcher under the bed. So if all of this comes together and we're in the middle of NATO, being surrounded by NATO nations, which will have to defend themselves and us in the process against the version of Tomahawks, I'm totally fine with that. I'm sorry for this half-joking approach. I don't want to offend anybody. What I believe that in this part of the globe, when we are too close to Russia, we just cannot afford this, privilege to really be civilized and peaceful as Switzerland. Next 100 years, maybe.
Okay, excellent. Dr. Friedman, we'll come back to you in a second, but first I do want to bring in one of Ukraine's most experienced diplomats who served as Minister of Foreign Affairs at some of Ukraine's most critical history, has served in embassies in London and Berlin, including as ambassador to Germany. So Pavlo Klimkin, Ambassador, it's great to have you here with us. So you watch, you see everything that's been going on for this during this full-scale war, the events that are happening tomorrow in Washington, in the White House, at the White House. What should we get ready for? What should we prepare for?
It's good to be part of this crowd, so resilient to coffee challenges. As a coffee addicted person, of course, I don't support coffee deterrence. So let's just be resilient. I mean, I believe that the US administration, at least Donald Trump himself, they still focused on oversimplifying three fundamental priorities. One is to bring an end to the combat activities. The second one, to overload the biggest part of the burden, let me say it very politely, to Europe, both military one and financial one, to Europe, which would, of course, mean changing US military posture in Europe. And the third one is, of course, to sort of normalize, to get relations with Russia normalized. And on the top of that, and it's a point of perception, it's a point of optics, it's all seen through a kind of Chinese optics. Basically, any kind of conversation with people in Washington kind of starts with China and ends up with China. So Ukraine is, unfortunately, whatever you hold about it, is not really important for the whole reality, but our voice is. And we need to use it, not in the sense of just getting the administration on our side. And it's been happening, actually. Not because of us, at least fully, but because of sort of changing strategic understanding. And the second point, what I like, what I feel from my conversation and chats over there, is a kind of better understanding what is at stake and what is driving the Russian leadership. Because, months ago, it was about a kind of let's get a deal. And if it's a sort of deal which should have got Russia out of this hole, so why not to take it? And now, at least I feel it. It's a slightly better understanding what is at stake in Russia, what is at stake around Russia, especially in South and East Asia. So my point, what to expect, is firstly a kind of strategy which won't be kind of common strategy, but at least coordinated one. Secondly, a kind of simple sequence of steps. What should we do? What should our partners and friends do? And in what sequence? And it's now widely discussed. And third, whether we can get to a sort of de-escalation through escalation, through de-escalation, or through a kind of, let me call it, unconventional way of thinking. Because there is no way how you get to end the Russian aggression on a normal path. What is at stake for the Russian leadership is their place in history, is a kind of understanding how Vladimir Putin gonna be measured towards Peter I or whoever. And the fundamental point that there should be justification for this war after that for the Russian regime inside. And if you see the latest opinion polls with all kind of my very cautious stance towards any Russian opinion polls. It's also the sense of changing reality within the Russian population, I would not say society, but also clear idea in the US administration that Russian economy is not just stumbling. It's something which goes beyond it in a kind of, let's say, 6 to 12 months from now.
Okay. Dr. Friedman, I want to bring you in on this. So President Zelensky at the White House, what should he do? What should he say to President Trump? What should he ask for? And what can he come back to Kyiv with?
Well, he can ask for weapons. The United States tried to negotiate with Russia, which not just think of Trump, but the country did. Trump was the agent, and Putin played him, manipulated him, and embarrassed him and the United States in that course. The United States at this point sees Russia as unable to enter into the kind of entente that the United States offered them. They are obsessed with Ukraine. They can't afford the loss. And therefore, this is a period of time where the United States must show that there are consequences that are potentially devastating to Russia, with the idea of the missiles that we've talked about being one thing that will happen. But still, it comes down to a fundamental question. How does this war end? All wars end. Some will end in victory, some defeat, and those that are stalemates, and I don't say this is a frozen war, but this is not a war where Russia is going to overrun Ukraine. This is not a war in which Ukraine is going to overrun Russia. Therefore, we must be thinking about the fact that given the shift in the American strategy to be more forthcoming on weapons, the question is, how does this war end? What does it look like? It does not look like Russia will occupy Ukraine. It does not look like Ukraine will occupy Russia. There must be an intermediate thing. When I talked about Switzerland, I did not mean to be Switzerland. I meant about what kind of solution will there be that the Russians can live with, and that Ukraine can live with, and that Europe can live with. And this is the question now. We can threaten the Russians and we can frighten them, but there are imperatives that they cannot give up, and we have to deal with that. There are imperatives Ukraine cannot give up, Europe cannot give up, America cannot give up. So it is time to start imagining what is coming, the end of this war. This is not a 100-year war. So therefore, we have to start thinking about various outcomes, because that's what the issue is now.
Thank you. So, Mason, Institute of the Study of War. So this is not a 100-year war. That's, I mean, how does it end?
I think if I had an answer to that, I would be a very rich man. But I don't think there's an easy way of predicting exactly how this is going to end. As I said earlier, I am not sure that this will necessarily end with a fully negotiated ceasefire of any sort. I think we may, maybe not a 100-year war, but certainly at least into the next several years, maybe up to 5 years, we may see continued combat operations. I think that will depend very much on how the Kremlin revisits its current objectives, which still unfortunately remain very maximalist, which is a continued point of friction in a lot of American and European discussions that constantly throw out options of, oh, well, what should we be offering the Russians? And there is little discussion of what the Kremlin is willing to negotiate about. And it's still very dedicated, despite its cost in blood and treasure, to a very, very protracted war. So Certainly, as has been discussed by all the speakers on the panel, one of the most important ways to change how that war is going to end is going to be through continued support to Ukraine. If that doesn't come through the forum of the EU or NATO as large organizations, I very much like the phrase, the beer-drinking states. I'm going to be taking that back with me to Washington. These sort of individual agreements with European states for co-production and allowing Ukraine to take on as much of the industrial base of the war so it can produce these capabilities itself rather than needing to rely on, to put it frankly, these repeated journeys to Washington to secure an undefined amount of aid, but rather be able to provide these capabilities for itself over the longer term, will enable Ukraine to approach any sort of war termination by being able to plan its own military operations with much more foresight of what capabilities it will actually have going forwards. The Russians, of course, are trying to dissuade this. We've seen this uptick in Russian violations of European airspace within the last couple of months, which I think are primarily intended to deter European states from continuing to support Ukraine and provide aid, economic and military aid. And unfortunately, the Russian narratives still have too much effect in European capitals, where we're seeing many European officials say that shooting down a Russian drone that is violating NATO airspace is somehow a NATO escalation, and that instance of many NATO officials, in fact, internalizing the Kremlin's narrative is one that unfortunately we've seen throughout this war, and is something that Ukraine's diplomats are doing a heroic job of trying to show both American and European politicians the flaws and the fact that those are Kremlin misperceptions that are part of Russian efforts to prolong the war and convince both the US, Europe, and Ukraine that there is no choice but to respect Russia's quote-unquote inviolable requirements for security and impose a Russia-favorable peace that Russian military capabilities cannot necessarily secure by force.
So just on that note, in terms of you in Washington, I mean, what is the view now of the White House, of the Kremlin, of President Putin? What's changed? I mean, do you feel that President Trump feels that he's been humiliated by President Putin?
I think there's certainly an element of that. I completely agree with the point that often the White House puts the idea of normalizing relations with Russia above many other circumstances. And unfortunately, the Kremlin has identified that. And what we are seeing in a lot of the back and forth between Russia and the White House is Russia offering so-called concessions on US-Russian relations in return for asking the US to pressure Ukraine into military concessions or cutting back support. And that's something that we at ISW and many other organizations are trying to push through to the White House and American politicians writ large to disconnect those two ideas and not let the Kremlin sort of dominate the tone of those discussions. I do think there is an element of Trump being frustrated, it may be the best word, though again, I can assure you it is just as difficult at times for us in Washington to understand the White House's policies as it is from here in Kiev, to speak bluntly. But there is, we are seeing Ukraine and European diplomats bring the White House around to the idea that what will bring Russia to the negotiating table is going to be continued support. Particularly, the White House is coming around on this idea of deep strikes on the Russian economy, and hopefully pulling back from discussions of lifting sanctions and that sort of thing.
So, Ambassador Prystaiko, I mean, what more can Ukraine do to get the White House to be on Ukraine's side here?
I believe that what can be done is what we're already doing. We are fighting and showing the resilience and, as I call it, a good return on political and defense investments. So the United States, I served myself in the United States in Washington, D.C. in 2009, 2012. And I many times on many different instances, when I was talking to the locals, especially the military side, they were always warning that be very mindful of what you're actually asking for. If you're asking to help you negotiate, we will help you negotiate. If you ask us to help you win, we can help you win. So this very much depends on what Ukraine. Where is this level of resilience within Ukrainians here and sitting here in this room, where we could allow our own governments, to push more for the resolution where we need weapons, and not in food in the carton packages. That's what we are offering right now. And I have to tell you that, yes, there are painful deviations, but that so far has been working. It is painful, we're losing people, territories, but at least their partners are with us. You see how the investments are growing. The peril is one thing, but for example, Germany, their last announcement, billions and billions of euros over what is expected within the Pearl program, and that's showing that finally, partners understood that there is still a chance to resolve the way which will be considered in Ukraine fair.
Okay, and Yehor, in Parliament, I think we are here mid-October. The temperatures are dropping. We had quite serious hits. Many people in this room were without electricity, without water last Friday. We're getting ready for a harsh winter. I mean, should we be getting more support from America at this stage, or what more can we do? Do you think that message is getting across? And if yes, what more can we do at this stage?
Well, when we have some bilaterals with our partners, European partners, the US partners, we always say that, look, why Russia shifts from the battlefield to air attack? Because they don't have some significant success on the battlefield, because they are offering conditions for the ceasefire or for the peace negotiations that we should just give up the territory of Donetsk region. They couldn't occupy it since 2014. They don't have any success, any big success on the battlefield. So they try to terrorize us in the civilian cities. They try to destroy our electricity facilities, gas supply facilities, critical infrastructure, because they also understand that they have a lack of time. I mean, Russians have a lack of time because the conditions of their economy. And it's true that they have a problem inside, and it's true that sanctions work, but it's not enough. It's not enough to stop Russia. So our request to our partners is the same. First priority is air defense systems. Air defense systems to protect our electricity grids, our electricity infrastructure, gas supply, etc., etc. Yes, we are asking for some components, some spare parts for those that already was damaged, and we are asking, have been asking actually for years, for this integrated common air defense shield on the western part of our country, where we can use our and their NATO capabilities to protect at least some part of Ukraine, to transfer some of our air defense systems to the central or eastern part. This is also one of the issues that under discussion. I cannot say that we are close to the decision because they consider it like entering in the war with Russia. However, we don't want and don't ask boots on the ground. We are asking use their systems and their jets from the territory of NATO and help us to destroy their Russian drones and missiles. So we understand it, but we have to, and our partners understand it, but we have to see on this a little bit wider. So why Russia starts these attacks? Because again, as I said, it has a lack of time. So we have increased the sanctions, and there is so many space for the sanctions in oil, gas, metallurgy, financial sector, nuclear power sector of Russia to if not destroy or collapse economy, but hurt this economy, their economy, and to stop the capability to wage this war in Ukraine. Another point, it's long-range missiles that can help us to destroy their facilities, which, military industrial complex or other thing. But if we make a step back just for 1 second about the Trump's administration decision for about the long-range missiles for Ukraine, like at Tomahawks, I think it will be step-by-step escalation. It will not be 100 of Tomahawks just tomorrow and with the permission to strike to any target on the territory of Russia. Because Trump doesn't want to escalate significantly relations with Russia. He wants to use it as a tool of the pressure to Putin to sit on the table with the negotiation and to start these negotiations. So, but again, it's a good signal for us, despite that Trump still wants to reestablish some connections with Russia. The final point, I think they have already understanding that their policy to cut Russia from China already failed, and they understand it, because all these games with Russia and not to escalate and try to use diplomacy more than the weapon, it was one of the reasons was just to cut Russia from China, because China, this is the main problem for the US these days and in the future.
Excellent, thank you. I think in terms of we more the business community, we've been focused on getting more suits on the grounds than boots on the ground. But I think the support of the military support is so important. And I would bring in Minister Klimkin, Pavlo. In terms of the Europeans, you're one of Ukraine's most experienced diplomats, and the role of US, I mean, is there a role for the Europeans still here? I mean, in terms of, and how does it work, this triangle, Ukraine, United States, and Europe? How does this work in the diplomatic sphere?
If I knew, like my colleague, I would get crazy rich. I mean, there should be a role for the Europeans. Europeans are constantly lost in translation, translating themselves, translating the others, and translating their perceptions. Because if we are talking about Tomahawks, coming back for a second, if we get 20 Tomahawks, it's a great story. Our militaries, together with Pentagon, will certainly find a way how to use them the most effective way. But the real strength comes actually from this political decision, because it would mean there are no conventional taboos anymore. And for the Europeans, it's now important to understand, firstly, they need conventional deterrence. It's not there. There is a kind of assessment that the Europeans would need around 1 trillion euro in the next 10 years, on the top of what they have now, in the sense of becoming semi-independent. Secondly, the Europeans need to admit in one moment to themselves that a kind of fragmented deterrence with the Brits and with the French does not work. And they're gonna need a real deterrence, conventional one and non-conventional one. But the real European problems is not that they are lacking some kind of sophisticated weapons or something like that. The real European challenge is mentality. I mean, what we learned in this war is about spirit, is about mentality. Whatever weapons you have, it's not what fundamentally decisive. And what the Europeans are lacking is the sense of spirit and mentality. Without this change, and it gonna bring a kind of different Europe. There is no sense how Europeans would play a different role. But Europeans, at least in all these realities, got the point that now it's not about Ukraine, it's about European security. And they needed almost 3 years of the full-scale war and 10 years of the war from 2014, even to start understanding it, fortunately or unfortunately. But they are there. They are not at the end of the process, but they are already at the beginning of it.
Yeah, I think that's very timely, especially as today the Bundestag is debating whether or not to introduce conscription or what are the options of returning to conscription in Germany. I know we're running, but we have time maybe for one or two very quick questions. So if you have any questions, please do raise your hand, and then we'll have a 30-second wrap-up from each of our speakers. If there are any further questions, I think I see a hand right there at the back. So if we can have a microphone at the back, please. Second row from the back. Якщо можна мікрофон. Дякую. Please just introduce yourself and...
Hello, my name is Cristian Segura. I'm a journalist from the Spanish newspaper El País. I don't know if at the beginning of the panel you talk about this, but these days President Zelensky and his team, they are underscoring that from the peace deal that was signed in Sharm el-Sheikh regarding Israel and Hamas, President Trump and also the international community, they can use this experience, this success, to implement some kind of a deal to stop the war in Ukraine. I would like to ask the panelists if they see any signs, positive signs in these agreements in the Middle East that could be applied here or no, that there is nothing in common between the two wars. Thank you very much.
Yes, who would like to take that, about the analogies between... Go for it, Mason.
Yes, I've been volunteered to speak on this. I don't think there are too many commonalities between the two agreements. They certainly, the major one I see is that the peace agreement in the Middle East, which is still very fragile to be clear and is not a done deal in the way that many in DC are talking about it, came about as the endpoint of a long series of not just negotiations, but battlefield changes. And that item is being lost, I think, in a lot of the current discussion in the United States, at least. I don't know how it's being perceived here, as if it was just nothing happened for however many years, 2 years, and then suddenly they signed a peace deal, and the details of what changed, the capabilities of Hamas and Israel, the military operations have been lost. If anything, I see that is the main thing that is going to be transferable to if serious discussions do resume between Ukraine and Russia. That being a major stumbling point for one, if Russia ever is willing to negotiate directly with Ukraine and not attempting to go over its head with the United States. But I don't think there are quite too many direct comparisons between the two peace agreements or a direct transference in the United States' ability to negotiate between one conflict and the other.
Super, thank you. Well, I think a fantastic panel, and I would like to invite every sort of panelist now for a very 30-second wrap-up. So the battle for the future, Ukraine's battle for the future in this new world as disorder. I mean, what does it look like? Minister Klimkin.
And if we live in a kind of hybrid world, whether it's multilateral, whether it's multipolar or multi-order, hybrid war is normality and hybrid peace is something like one-off. So we have to get used for it. And I believe we have a number of advantages. And we are needed by key players, at least sort of good guys, to be around and to play around. And in geopolitics, there is no win-win. It's either rational conversation or strength. we can both talk rationally and we can apply strengths, but only with our friends and partners. So we have a simple choice. And I believe it's a positive one.
Ambassador Pristaiko.
I guess that the end game for in our case, what we would love to have is that we are making our own political mistakes on our own will. We call Russia in our schools textbooks aggressor. We speak Ukrainians. We fight with the European standards on milk and poultry and whatever we have to do. But we all cover it by the nuclear umbrella of NATO, something like that.
Mason Clark.
I think one thing that's important to keep in mind is that many of Ukraine and Europe and the US's adversaries, all of China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, are unified, and put unified in air quotes there, by their opposition to things, by opposition to the post-World War II world order, opposition to sovereignty of states, good governance, that sort of thing. It is, I think, an under-recognized strength of Ukraine and all of its partners when they're working together effectively, that we're all striving together for something, for good governance, for the respective states' borders, for sustainable and equal economic development and integration. And even if Ukraine and its partners are not able to work in these large blocks of the EU, NATO, what have you, there is still a lot of great strength in those aspirations to something, not simply in opposition to something like Russia and its partners.
Yehor.
When I speak with our partners, I said that I always say that, look, you gave us 3 days. We have been fighting for almost 4 years. You said now us know about the tanks, F-16s, missiles, and everything else, and we got it. You said that. We destroyed 30% of Russian fleet. We made some operation like spider web, and we shifted the artillery shells famine by the drones, and this is our development. So we proved several times that we can not only survive, but release our territories. And we will continue to fight, and we will continue to surprise you as a partners. But we need you as a partners, as a friends, with your support and with your weapon and with your financing. So there are no any other chance for us to keep fighting and to win in this war. And for us to win in this war, not the same as for Russia. For Russia, not victory is the defeat. For us to win in this war, it means that to stand as a country, sovereign and independent country. And believe me, these outcomes will destroy Russia inside even more than on the battlefield, because after the end of this war, Russians will ask to Putin and to another authorities, what for was this millions of people who was killed and injured? What for billions of dollars were spent on this money? And the stance of the condition of the economy of Russia will be even worse after the war, and will lead to unemployment, to decrease the wages, and to social problems inside the country. And this will be our chance to get back our territories when Russia will collapse.
Thank you. Dr. Friedman.
Well, we have spoken about all the problems we have. We should speak about Russian problems. Putin has been humiliated by his failure in the war. He has damaged the Russian economy profoundly. He's cost millions of lives. We should be also focusing on Russia not as a monolithic power, but on the processes that are underway in Russia. The polls may not be trustworthy, but certainly there must be deep anger at the cost that Russia has paid. And Putin failed. And we have to remember, Putin is not Stalin. He's not even Brezhnev. He is surrounded by many people who have paid a great deal of price. We are constantly talking about what we must do as if Russia itself is not incredibly vulnerable internally, and how we play that. So we are fighting against each other and what weapons they have, and these are very important fights, and they have to be taking place. But at the same time, we must recognize the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities of the Russians. We must take advantage of them. We do so with weapons, but also with trying to manage potential relationships without Putin. So we have to take a look at Russia to understand how the war will end. And we will have to look at not just fighting the war, but how it ends. And the weakness that we have is far less than the weakness that Putin has. He has gone far, he has failed, he can intimidate as much as he wants, but he has cost Russia a great deal. And we should be utilizing that fact internally and be carrying out a very sophisticated operation, not missiles so much, but making sure that the Russian people who oppose clearly what has happened, to some part, have some sort of sense of opportunity. This is not a question of pacifism or benignness. It is hybrid warfare, and that's what we should be also conducting, as well as all the things that were discussed here today.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for you all being here. And let's give a round of applause to our fantastic panel. So George Freeman, Mason Clark, Yehor Cherniev, Vadim Prestaiko, Pavlo Klimkin, thank you. The battle continues, and thank you for everything you do to help Ukraine in this battle, in this historic battle, and together we move towards victory. Thank you. Slava Ukraini!